Next, from Springfield, State Senator Jason Barickman holds a press conference to discuss the aspects of his legislation, Senate Bill 1124, which would reform the state's school funding formula. This runs about 40 minutes.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining us this morning. My name is Jason Barickman, State Senator from the 53rd District out of Bloomington. We're here to talk about school funding, and you know, for the last several weeks there has been just a lot of over-the-top and unproductive rhetoric regarding our state's broken school funding formula. I think lost in all the accusations that people are committing ethical violations, that people are lying, there's been accusations that people are racist. Lost in all of that is the fundamental question of what we're trying to accomplish in our efforts to fix the broken school funding formula. We spent months, members of both chambers and both parties, through the Governor's Funding Reform Commission, we produced a report that outlined both the problem and a blueprint for moving forward. That blueprint includes the fact that Illinois has extreme disparities in the way they spend money on our school districts. The disparity that exists between our poor schools and our wealthier schools. This is the inequity that exists in the system that is there today. It's the problem that we're trying to solve, and amid all the accusations and the rhetoric, members of both sides of the aisle, both chambers, claim that their goal is to fix this problem. The answer to whether we're accomplishing our goal, though, the goal again, to produce a fair and equitable solution for our poorest children, our neediest school districts, the evidence of whether a solution exists isn't established by personal feelings and emotion. It's not a subjective test. The question of whether we're producing a fair and equitable funding plan is established by an objective analysis that is both measurable and void of emotional influence. An objective analysis of SB 1 concludes, SB 1, the proposal advanced by Democrats in late May, an objective analysis of that legislation concludes that it falls well short of fulfilling this goal of a fair and equitable solution. In fact, Republicans have not and will not support that plan because we feel there is a better way to solving this problem. Now, that's not to say that Democrats haven't put forward some good ideas. In fact, the efforts of Senators Menard and Lightfoot in the Senate, Representative Will Davis over in the House, have put forward many good ideas. We've had ongoing discussions, even still today, about the good ideas that I think exist within both caucuses, members of both parties. The reality is, when you combine the good ideas of the Republicans and the Democrats, you get a better product. That's what Representative Pritchard and I have done in our legislation, Senate Bill 1124, his House Bill 4069. We have combined the good ideas put forward by Democrats and Republicans, put those in legislation, and it becomes an example where the whole becomes greater than the sum of its parts. By combining the best ideas of Republicans and Democrats, we achieve a more equitable result for our poor school children in our neediest schools. But you don't need to take my word for it. Look at the data, and that's what we're here to do today. How do we measure equity? We all know there are two drivers. These have been explained and discussed thoroughly. Two drivers. How many school children in a district are poor? In the materials that we've handed out today, this variable is called the low income percentage. You see it right there in that column. The second variable, what ability does a local school district have to raise funds? This is primarily done through property taxes at a local level. What ability does a school district have to raise funds to adequately provide a high-quality education for their students? In your materials, this is called an adequacy percentage. You'll note that there's no dispute between Republicans and Democrats about what percentages of low-income students exist in school district. There's also no question among Republicans and Democrats, and no difference in the legislation at how we treat adequacy percentages among the districts. So to explain what you've got, when you see the column labeled percent low income, if there's a high percentage there, some of our school districts are as high as 100%, that means there's a lot of poor kids in that school district. The lower the percent, the less poor kids. In the column labeled adequacy, it works in the other way. The question of whether districts have adequate funds is measured by a percentage, and those who have high percentages are believed on the data to have a high capacity of funding their schools at a local level. Thus, some of your higher percentages in this column reflect more of our schools who have adequate local resources. That's what you're looking at. That data comes from the Illinois State Board of Education. Inequitable solution results in more state dollars being provided to districts with high percentages of low-income students and low percentages of adequate local resources. This is the problem, and that's what we're trying to solve. No one's ever disputed the methods of measuring equity. That's because these are data-driven variables. They're not influenced by people's perceptions of what is poor, what is adequate, or what is available. So to my earlier point, that when we combine the best ideas of Democrats and Republicans, we produce a more equitable result. All we have to do now is look at the data. I asked the Illinois State Board of Education to produce a simulation of Senate Bill 1124, and have asked them to post the results of that simulation on their website. My understanding is that they will do that later here this morning. We anticipate around 11 o'clock. We've also provided you with a printed summary of that data that you can pour through today. And on the Senate Republican website, we have produced a comparison of this data in Senate Bill 1124 and a side-by-side analysis with Senate Bill 1. The goal being an apples-to-apples comparison of two pieces of legislation, and again, the desire to look at how we are addressing the inequities in the system. So let's take a few examples of what we see in the data. I'd point you to a couple of school districts: Aurora East Unit School District 131, Cicero School District 99, East St. Louis School District 189. All of these districts have 100% concentrations of poverty. But if you look further, you see that they each have different abilities of funding an adequate level of resources to their district based on property taxes. And as a result, Senate Bill 1124 drives more resources to the school of those three districts that have the same concentrations of poverty. We drive more resources to the schools who are furthest from adequacy, have less available local resources. In that case, it'd be Aurora East. We've provided you this information on a per pupil basis, which is a good method of comparing the data. We've also shown you the overall gain that those school districts would anticipate receiving. And again, on the Senate Republican website, and I think some of the materials you have, you see this side-by-side comparison to see, A, whether or not we're addressing the inequities, but B, that comparison with SB 1 to see which method, in fact, solves that inequity problem that we all say we seek to solve. Now compare those school districts with lots of poor kids and less adequate local resources to some school districts who have very different circumstances locally. We looked at Downers Grove, Grade School District 58, Elmhurst School District 205. Respectively, those school districts have a 21% poverty concentration and a 17% poverty concentration, well below what some of our other poor districts see. In regards to available local resources, they have respectively 99% and 109% adequate local resources. This means they have less poor kids, more money available locally. The result of that is they get very little money through the formula, because instead of sending it there, we're sending the money to the districts who are most in need. And importantly, I think we need to look at Chicago Public Schools, right? I think Senate Bill 1124 hits a middle ground, a sweet spot, if you may, by providing meaningful resources to CPS in accordance with the data and the formula, but not by using gimmicks and masking the true benefits that Chicago would see, which may lead some to conclude that it's a bailout. There's an important sweet spot here that can deliver meaningful resources to Chicago, but not allow people and taxpayers to conclude that it's a bailout. Now, again, I think a plan that combines the good ideas does a better job of fixing our inequitable system. I think the data proves it. The data proves that Senate Bill 1124 does a better job of fixing the inequitable system. Here's how we got to Senate Bill 1124. As you'll recall, it's been talked about over the last week what happened in late May in the negotiations that were commencing and occurring in the Senate. In fact, in late May, Democrats walked away from the table and they advanced a whole host of legislation which they said they were going to do on their own when they walked away from the negotiating table. What we've done in Senate Bill 1124 is looked at where the two parties were there then, and there was a lot of agreement between the two on school funding reform. We looked at where we were then, and we asked ourselves, how can we close the gap here to reach a meaningful compromise with the Democrat majority that allows us to produce a fair and equitable funding formula? The results shown in Senate Bill 1124, where Senate Bill 1124 agrees entirely with Senate Bill 1, it's the same language, on all of the issues of whether we use and how we use an evidence-based model, how we address poverty concentration, the tier structures, whether or not CPS is in Tier 1 or Tier 2. CPS remains in Tier 1, just like in Senate Bill 1. We applied the same regionalization factor and adjustments. All of those things that we've spent time, all of us, trying to understand what they do and why they do the things that they do, you see agreement among Republicans and Democrats, Senate Bill 1, Senate Bill 1124. What's left are only 4 areas where Republicans today are offering middle ground or compromises to close the gap and get this done. They deal with 4 things. A hold harmless. Senate Republicans have advocated, and the Governor's Funding Reform Commission agreed that we should do a hold harmless on a per-pupil basis. The Democrats have advanced legislation that maintains a hold harmless on a district level. We split the gap and say, let's do the Democrat model for 3 years, and then let's switch to a per-pupil basis beginning on year 4. Importantly, when you do that and you move that hold harmless to a per-pupil basis, you free up resources that can then be placed in those districts who have the highest concentration of poor kids and the least available local resources. The second area is regarding the Chicago Block Grant. Republicans had proposed to do away with the block grant and remove the overage that Chicago receives as a result of that block grant. The Democrat proposal says that while they do away with the block grant, they embed the value of it within Chicago's base. Again, we try to split the difference and close the gap here by saying we both agree to do away with the block grant, and Republicans are proposing to continue funding in Chicago's base some of the value of the block grant. The sum is specific to funding for children, personal reimbursement, and summer school. The third area regards Chicago's pensions, and this is an area where, unfortunately, the pension problems of our state have bled into the various solutions to solve a school funding formula. The reality is we should be trying to fix the schools here, not trying to solve the pension crisis. But we understand that we need to try to move the ball forward here and, again, close the gap. So where Republicans had originally proposed that none of Chicago's pension payments and obligations would be picked up by the state, which is the law today, Democrats proposed that the state pick up the normal pension costs for Chicago, the health care costs for Chicago, and the legacy pension obligations for Chicago. We again try to close the gap by proposing that the state pick up the normal pension costs for Chicago. This is just like we do for the TRS, the state pension system for our teachers. And then lastly, in the area of mandate relief. In the area of mandate relief, Republicans have continually proposed ideas that are designed to give school districts more flexibility and allow them an ability to spend the limited resources they have in the most meaningful way based on local decisions. Republicans have continued to offer mandate relief. Democrats have not. Yet, we propose in our compromise language here that the mandate relief we offer removes some of the most objectionable items as reflected by the negotiations, the feedback that we received from Democrats during those negotiations. So again, we try to split the gap. And so, ultimately, when this is done, I think you see a product that does a couple of things. Number one, it reflects the priorities of both Republicans and Democrats who say they want to fix an inequitable and broken school funding system. We think Senate Bill 1124, by incorporating the ideas of both parties and the members who've shown and demonstrated leadership on this, by incorporating those ideas, we believe on the data that we have produced a better result, a more equitable result that again solves the problem of our broken school funding system. Importantly, we do this by living within the budget that's been proposed by Republicans. That budget number proposes a spend number on schools that is identical to the budget proposed by Senate Democrats, so there's no disagreement in how much to spend. Again, ours adopts that model. This model produces no red numbers. Nobody loses money. Every school district stands to gain, but the school districts who stand to gain the most are the ones who have the highest concentration of poor kids and the least ability to meet their needs locally. Chicago is one of those school districts, and as a result, Chicago will see meaningful gains by this formula. In doing so, they stand next to and alongside hundreds of other school districts in this state who face equal challenges to Chicago in regards to the poverty concentration that they have locally and the availability that they have to satisfy their needs through property taxes. So with that, my call today and my urge today is that the Democratic leaders in both the House and the Senate will take this proposal up. Obviously, people are going to give it due scrutiny. We think, again, we've hit a sweet spot. My desire is that the Democrats give this ample consideration and that we expeditiously see it move forward for a vote. I think we can draw bipartisan support on this plan, and that we can then move forward and change the law and fix the broken system that we have. With that, I'm glad to take any questions.
Well, Senator, you explained it a little bit, but I'd like to do it again. Regarding Chicago, you and the governor and everyone else said Senate Bill 1 was a bailout for Chicago, and just going by the numbers at the end here on the last page, $164 million in your bill versus $70 million for Senate Bill 1. More than twice the extra money for Chicago.
Yes.
You're saying this isn't a bailout.
So Dave, you're reading the printouts that we've provided. Republicans continued, and I continue to believe, that the numbers published for Senate Bill 1 masked and hid the true benefit to Chicago. As a result, what you're looking at appears to purport that the Republican proposal spends more money in total and on a per pupil basis in Chicago than what was delivered under Senate Bill 1. And you call that into question. We too called into question whether the numbers published by Senate Bill 1 were in fact accurate. We don't believe they are. I still don't believe that they are. And while I can point you to where the areas in the formula where we think the Democrats hid money and manipulated the formula to Chicago's benefit, the reality is they produced the numbers on Senate Bill 1 that you're comparing this to, and on their numbers, apparently the Republican model spends more on Chicago. I think when people dig into the details, what we'll all find is that the Republican suggestions before are true, that in fact Senate Bill 1 hid and masked a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars for Chicago. The Democrats who advanced the formula simply weren't open and transparent about what they were doing. And quite frankly, it worked to their advantage. In those final days of the May session, you know, the reality is this Senate Bill 1 advanced out of the Senate, moved over to the House where there were some negotiations, and then the Democrats in the House moved quickly on an amendment that Republicans heavily criticized. They pushed forward, Speaker Madigan pushed forward a vote. There was a lot of arm twisting on it. I think a lot of members probably voted with less than the information that we would hope to have on such an important vote. And I think that when the real numbers for Senate Bill 1 are produced, I think it creates an impossible situation or possibility for Senate Bill 1 to receive the same vote total that it did in late May.
The low ball
Who
numbers,
decided ultimately what schools in the, downstate got more money? Who made that decision?
The
What
four,
schools? I
Yeah.
know formula, but, I mean, was it your input? Who decided that what downstate schools would get more?
it is not the public officials. The data, as a result of input from the education community, produces 27 data elements for which the State Board of Education can run individualized school district data through. And when that happens, the dollars flow where they may based on those data. It has nothing to do with any legislator's view. Our point, our contention is, so long as you don't manipulate the data, you get a pure result. And I think that's what you see in Senate Bill 1124. We have accepted the fact that if you follow the data, then the conclusions, where the dollars go, get in the best place where they're needed. It's the best place where taxpayers can look at it and say, that makes sense, and it gets the dollars in those neediest school districts.
Where the money would be spent.
We
Where's
want-
it coming from? You're proposing more money than Senate Bill 1 had, but where is this additional revenue coming from?
No, Senate Bill 1 and this model, I can't speak to the presumptions made in Senate Bill 1. I think Senate Bill 1 proposes to spend more money than the Senate Democrat budget and appropriation that is separate legislation. Nonetheless, Senate Bill 1124 proposes to spend additional money. That additional money is found in the capital compromise, the budget offered up by Republicans last week. It's that number.
Senator,
And Kim.
Let's go back onto these numbers and
Sure.
identify what they each represent.
Sure.
So in the overall gain category,
Mhm.
SB 1124, those numbers are ISB runs
Correct?
based off of
The budget proposal proposed by Republicans,
$250 million.
288, I think the spend is 288.
Okay, so this reflects a whole harmless plus 288 distributed amongst the schools according to the new formula.
Yes.
The SB1 category, where do those numbers come from?
Those are the numbers published by the State Board of Education, and those are the numbers that were flying around here in late May.
Okay, so those are ISB numbers as well.
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, if
The methodology is the same on both of them,
they're different formulas.
but ISB's methodology for running the numbers, the numbers were run by the same people following the same
Yes.
methodology.
Yes.
Okay, so they're comparable numbers.
Yes. If you, and I just want to interrupt you 1 second. If you go to the State Board of Education website, some of you may have been there, there's a number of links to Excel spreadsheets. One of those links will be published today. It says Senate Bill 1124, Amendment 3. In that link, you will see an overall gain for Senate Bill 1124. If you go to a separate link on the ISB website for Senate Bill 1, Amendment, the version that's passed both chambers, and looked in that same column of overall gain, these are the numbers that you'll see. Our staff, simply put them side by side for all of our benefit to do an apples-to-apples comparison. Hold on.
And when you look at these numbers, it looks like in every instance, every school district gets considerably more on your bill versus SB1. So where is that money coming from? I think that's the question, is like how.
Yeah, this is when Republicans said during the vote, the deliberations on Senate Bill 1, remember what we said. We said that the sponsors had manipulated the formula, baked into the base assumptions and dollars that weren't reflected in the spreadsheets that they produced. When you remove those manipulations, the gimmicks used to bake things into the base, it frees up dollars that then can be distributed to all schools in need. That's all that we've done. And that's what Senate Bill 1124 does.
But these numbers come from ISB, not the people who wrote SB1.
ISB had to run a simulation of SB1 with the language in that hundreds of pages of legislation. In those hundreds of pages are manipulations that were designed to benefit the Chicago public school system. When you remove the manipulations in the legislation and provide the legislation to ISB, they show a different outcome. It's an outcome that still benefits CPS, but we've removed the dollars baked in and hidden and instead distributed through the formula, which is what the goal here is. We distribute those dollars through the formula. CPS benefits from that. That's why, to Dave's question, why do your numbers on a per pupil basis, as stacked up against CPS, appear to spend more? Because we are spending more money through the formula on Chicago than was purported in SB1.
So SB 1 is lowball, a phony, and a bailout, yet SB 1124, which by these numbers is more than twice as much for Chicago, is not a bailout for Chicago.
I think that the reality of SB1 is that there's more money hidden for Chicago than is disclosed by the sponsors. Sure. I would direct you, time out. I would direct you to the State Board of Education, who has modeled Senate Bill 1 with the Senate Democrat budget appropriation, and you'll see a very different result. I think so. I think you have to go there for some of those answers. I come back to the response that I gave earlier. When you remove our job is to write the law or the legislation. And when you change the manipulations in the sentences of that law and provide that to ISB to model and to run a simulation, the results are very different. And that's what we expect.
Senator, again, to the question of how are you going to pay for this? There were Democrats in here just before. They left a sponsor slip there for the Senate Bill 9 to have any kind of amendments. How are you going to pay for this? Any kind of increase in education? And then also, how are you going to ensure that the money stays in the classroom and doesn't go to bureaucracies with 800 plus school districts and bloated budgets and so on?
Yeah, so there's an ongoing debate. Hopefully, we encourage a negotiation over the budget. Obviously, we're not at the finish line. Republicans and the governor has continually said that as part of those negotiations, we are willing to put Republican support on a revenue package that's coupled with meaningful reforms for the state of Illinois economy and taxpayers. That debate continues. I think the Democrat ideas to spike the football before they're in the end zone on that, it's a little premature. But I am encouraged that the message I heard earlier today from some of our Democratic colleagues is that they want a further negotiation, as do we. And I think we all know where that needs to happen. President Cullerton points at Speaker Madigan. We point at Speaker Madigan. The guy's yet to propose anything either way, and it's time for him to step forward and tell us which direction he wants to go. However, we're here to your second part of the question. We're here on how we fix the broken school funding formula, and you raise an interesting question, and one that deserves attention, which is how do we make sure that the money that is provided by the state to school districts is being spent on the services that are necessary to providing that high-quality education, not being spent on bureaucracy and bloat that is the concern of taxpayers. The answer to that is you adopt an evidence-based model. That's why we proposed what we have, and that's why I think you see wide agreement among Republicans and Democrats that the expenditure of state dollars when run through an evidence-based model puts the dollars in the districts who need them the most and is backed up by data and best practices, not as suggested by public officials, but as suggested by the education community.
These numbers here, and they're both from the State Board of Education, and they come out higher for Chicago in yours than theirs. Are you saying the Board of Education is knowingly participating in a fraud?
No, not at all, not at all.
What is the language you're talking about that's hidden that they don't know about? Why wouldn't they know about it if they know this model?
We can provide you instructions that will direct you to the cells that in fact disclose the hidden money for Chicago.
Do you have that language?
We have that, and our staff will pass it out. Basically, we're going to instruct you to go to the website. We're going to tell you where to click and which cells to look at. And when you get there, what you'll see is at a minimum, in one circumstance, $418 million that was never disclosed by the sponsors of SB1, $418 million in benefits to Chicago, for which it took, I mean, these spreadsheets are monstrous, and it took us a lot of time. We weren't able to locate that immediately, but we have since found that. It's not a Senate Republican analysis. It's the data that is produced by the State Board of Education. It's in there. Simply the proponents of SB1 never directed anyone where to look at it.
So one or two examples of those.
Sure. There is, we call it the base, right? There is a base funding level for which every school district starts, and then when you apply money through the formula, the evidence-based model, dollars go to a district on top of that base. You will see in the State Board simulation for SB1 that every school district has a base that is consistent, that is not manipulated. Yet when you look at the line item for Chicago, what you will see is that there is $418 million added to one cell. It's a manipulation that exists nowhere else in the spreadsheet. ISB did what the legislative language of SB1 instructed them to do. So it's not their fault it's there, it's to their credit that they did it just like the legislation proposed. No one pointed any of you, or any of us for that matter, to that information because it was more convenient to point to per pupil spending amounts in the formula and draw people's attention to those rows and columns rather than the important column, which is, where are we starting with all this? What's people's base? And when you manipulate Chicago's base, you put resources there first before you put money into the formula. And what that means is when Senate Bill 1124 extracts that manipulation, it freed up $418 million that we then applied through the formula. Benefiting.
Does that number exceed the amount of money that CPS received in fiscal year 2017? Or was supposed to receive between general state aid and categoricals? That number that includes the $418 million, is it equivalent to what they received in this fiscal year?
I can't answer that. I mean, yeah, the four, I wish I had my notes for that. I don't,
Yeah, what I'm asking
yeah.
is it part of the whole harmless and it looks...
It is part of the block grant. I believe it is part of the block grant that was removed by law, but the value is baked into Chicago's base, plus a pension, the cost of the CPS normal pension cost, I believe is the walk-up to that number. And again, we'll provide you the details of that.
So every other school district has their pension costs covered by the state. Why is it not fair to bake that into Chicago's base? Essentially baked in, granted in another bill or in another form of law, but it is essentially baked in for every other school.
No, we propose, Senate Bill 1124 and the budget proposed by Republicans proposes to treat CPS's pensions the same as we do TRS. We don't try to bake it in, there's no TRS payment baked into people's base. There's a payment made by the state of Illinois towards TRS, right? We propose to do that to the Chicago pension fund rather than doing what the Democrats did, which was bake it into the base without disclosing that as an obvious thing that they've done. When we discovered what they've done, we said there's a better way, a more transparent way to do this. So we both agree that the state should pick up the normal pension cost for CPS. We simply propose to do it in the same manner that we treat every other school district, rather than hiding it within a base and hiding it with the formula.
Why should Chicago not get any money for the legacy pension costs? For all of these years that the state has been giving that for other districts, and now Chicago, that would have been a huge payment.
Well, remember, Amanda, we're here trying to fix a broken school funding formula. We all acknowledge the pension crisis that exists. Nowhere. In fact, we spent months at the Reform Commission. There was explicit discussion on whether our charge there was to fix the formula and fix the pension system, and both sides agreed. The charge is to fix the formula. So trying to create a solution to an inequitable formula that also fixes a broken pension system, never been the goal, and that's not what I'm trying to do here.
But one of the arguments that CPS makes is that they have to take money that they have on hand and pay it towards their legacy costs. And that it's unfair to count this is where the formula comes in, and it's unfair to count their formula to include that money that's really spoken for already as part of their adequacy target. Do you agree with that?
This is an example where the Democrats have continued, there's been a lot of blame that Republicans have moved the goalpost. This is an example of the Democrats moving the goalpost. We have heard a year ago and more from Speaker Madigan and President Cullerton that they asked the state of Illinois to pick up the Chicago normal pension cost. Republicans stand here today offering to do just that. The fact that Democrats in Chicago now is coming at the 11th hour with an additional request is simply an example of them moving the goalpost and making it incredibly difficult to get to a solution here as June 30th approaches.
It's 11:55, almost midnight. Should there be a stopgap education, standalone education program?
No, we need to focus on a full year budget, a balanced budget, and why we're here today, we need to adopt meaningful reforms to many areas of the state, including our broken school funding formula. That's the proposal that Republicans have offered today. I think the proposal, again, adopts the many good ideas that have been proposed by members of both parties, and I think this represents a real solution that the governor can sign into law and provide meaningful results to many needy school children and school districts all around our state.
Does this provide any funding at all for Chicago legacy pension issues?
It provides Chicago meaningful dollars, and I'll get you the number here in a second, but it provides Chicago meaningful dollars that they then have the flexibility to use in the manner that they deem the best. We are trying to address some of the concerns that they've raised, and we're doing so. We're putting our name behind it as Republicans, but we're doing it in a way that recognizes that Chicago is among many other schools facing financial challenges that arise from lots of poor kids and a lack of local resources. When we treat Chicago fairly and the same as we treat other similar school districts, they receive a benefit, and that's what we're proposing here today.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.